What is up, YouTube? I'm Rob from RP Model Railroads. I just want to share with all of you some recent updates to my HO scale Ephrata Valley Railroad layout. And here's the junkyard scene on the layout, and it's called Putnick's Salvage Junkyard. I want to talk about some of the latest details that have been added to this scene to improve it, starting off with these two custom scrap trucks right here. Both of these trucks were kit bashed by Aaron some time ago. This one over here used to be a Hot Wheels Peterbilt, and I think it turned out quite awesome. And this Matchbox Peterbilt is the second Putnick's Salvage scrap load truck. And again, both of these turned out great, much like the other vehicles that Aaron painted for either the Ephrata Valley Maintenance of Way team or for the layout itself. I think they turned out great, especially with the cranes and the scrap loads in the back of the trucks. Here is Putnick's Salvage Junkyard's office / garage that I weathered with some black and reddish brown paint to look rusty and beat up. And the Putnick's Salvage Junkyard sign is on top of the office. Over here we have a custom Putnick's Salvage Lifelike crane and some a resin scrap load and some junk plastic HO scale vehicle parts down there. There are some better details that I do want to add to this scene in the future. And you might notice that the stone on the ground is a bit different from how it used to look, and that's because it's a mix of both black and gray stone, which looks pretty awesome, and it has a great contrast for the black Putnick's Salvage vehicles and the scrap loads in the junkyard. And now we're moving to the larger scrap pile section of Putnick's Salvage Junkyard, including some rusty old train axles, two old Ephrata Valley Alco C430 cabs that are unfortunately cut up for scrap, another large scrap load with a red stock car and a green automobile, and it looks like a junked tank car there. And then another scrap load down below. All of these large scrap loads were done up by Aaron, and I think they turned out great. And of course we have some Ephrata Valley gondolas loaded with scrap metal in the siding. And last but not least, a new addition to the scene as well. This is a repainted Tyco gantry crane. I painted this thing black and red, the Putnick's Salvage colors, and then I went ahead and weathered the entire crane, maybe a bit overkill, with some reddish brown paint to look like a rusty old gantry crane in the junkyard siding, and I think it turned out great. So yeah, the junkyard scene has certainly improved, and while there are a lot of little details that I want to add in the future, at least the scene looks way better than it did before, and I'm quite happy with it. These next additions are some of the smallest, but they add to the town aspect of the layout, and they are telephone poles. All the telephone poles on the layout were strategically placed to represent a power grid that starts with Standard Electric Company here in Industryville, with electrical wires that are invisible that lead from Industryville, cross over the railroad tracks, and into the town of Ephrata, providing power from Standard Electric to Industryville and to Ephrata. And here are the telephone poles in Industryville. All of these telephone poles are Tyco telephone poles. And it's my personal opinion, but I think that the Tyco telephone poles were some of the best HO scale telephone poles of their time. So in layout planning, the idea was for Standard Electric Company to provide power to both Industryville and the town of Ephrata, and the only way for that to happen is for telephone poles to cross the railroad tracks. And here's the result. 3 massive telephone poles, the one in the middle being the biggest, that Aaron kit bashed from various telephone pole pieces that he had. And check these out. These poles turned out amazing. Down to some of the smallest details, including these little Standard Electric signs, SE, upside down triangle signs, that are on all 3 of these big telephone poles. And they represent a large transfer of power across the railroad tracks, right in front of Mount Flattop, into the town of Ephrata. With imaginary electricity being carried over the tracks by these 3 telephone poles, we end up in the town of Ephrata. Now here on Anthracite Avenue, there are 2 telephone poles, that pole right there being a custom pole, next to the Good Shepherd Church, a custom pole that Aaron made, to represent a pole that splits power off the main and takes it down Main Street. Now, on the other side of Anthracite Avenue, we have poles that take power to Al's General Store, the school district, and then across the railroad tracks into the backdrop into infinity. On the left side of Anthracite Avenue, we have another telephone pole that carries the wires up on the left side, and then we have two half poles on both sides of House Street. So this is a pretty interesting setup, but what it's supposed to represent is that the half poles on the left are carrying electricity to the businesses on Roosevelt Street, including the Equitable Trust Bank, the Ephrata Police Department, the Ephrata Fire Department, and so on. And the poles on the right side of House Street are bringing electricity to the homes on House Street. Now, of course, there are no telephone poles on Railroad Avenue because there are no industries or buildings that require electricity on Railroad Avenue. Hopefully you can see that a lot of planning went into the placement of these telephone poles. So these telephone poles here wrap up around Main Street, carrying imaginary power lines through beyond the Ephrata Hole-in-One Donut Shop, back to power the Ephrata Civil Defense 3T22 siren, and then off into infinity in the backdrop. Moving beyond the strategic placement of telephone poles in the layout, we're now going to talk about signs. All the following signs were made by Aaron, and I think they turned out quite awesome, for various buildings on the layout. Starting with Storty Tool and Die Company. That's right, this factory right here is none other than Storty Tool and Die Plant. And here are the other Storty Tool and Die signs, which look great. RWP Lumber Company sign. Ephrata Valley Civil Defense and Fallout Shelter signs that are placed on the Ephrata Fire Department substation. These would have been common on fire stations and some other buildings in towns across America in the late 50s, 60s, and probably even 70s. Ephrata Valley Public Works sign atop the Public Works and Water Company building. And here is a large Spartan Tire Manufacturing Company sign with the Spartan helmet logo. This just looks fantastic. And here's the last sign placed in Industryville: cars roll better on Spartan tires. And here we are on the town of Ephrata at Equitable Trust Bank, and here is an advertisement for Keystone Motor Oil, a subdivision of Penzo Oil Company. Just check out the level of detail on that little sign. Here is another Ephrata Valley Civil Defense sign on the side of EFD's main station on Roosevelt Street. And also, here is a custom-made poster board curb that makes these two buildings here, AAA Trains and the Ephrata Journal and Post Office building, line up with the rest of the curbs, which are lifelike buildings on Roosevelt Street. And here's three very important signs on three buildings in the town of Ephrata. Here's the Perfect Fit clothing store and much more. Here's the Chef Peschetti Italian restaurant. Check that out, spaghetti and meatballs, right there on that sign. Here is the opposite side of Chef Peschetti restaurant sign featuring a nice pizza that faces the other direction on Main Street. And Mr. Cutright's Barbershop. All three of these buildings look 10 times better with those signs on them. And there are some smaller details that I will be adding in the future to these buildings, but now we have the Perfect Fit clothing store, Chef Peschetti Italian restaurant, and Mr. Cutright's Barbershop right here on Main Street in the town of Ephrata. And here's two of my favorite signs that Aaron made for the entire sign project for the town of Ephrata and Industryville. Ride the Eastern Flyer Combined and Climb Aboard, featuring an Ephrata Valley Alco PA unit. These two signs are on the side of Mr. Cutright's Barbershop, facing towards Railroad Avenue and Schuylkill Valley Station. And they look great there. And last but not least, we can't forget these two last signs. Here is a nice sign for coal on the Ephrata Valley Coaling Tower in Norristown Yard. And here is a sign for sand that shows a sand pile and a wheel rolling down the rails on top of the sanding station, also in Norristown Yard. Here's another very important little detail that was added in Industryville, right behind Spartan Tire Manufacturing Company. It is the Ephrata Public Works Sewer Lift Station. This right here was an idea that Aaron came up with, and it's surrounded by woodland scenic shrubbery that makes more sense when I talk about the backdrops. Well, I certainly hope you all enjoyed this layout update video, and there's a lot more in store for the Ephrata Valley Railroad in 2023. Thank you for watching.